I'm Corey Paulson, and I teach these wonderful students here, 8th grade humanities.
Great. I'm Jim Camden. I'm a reporter for the Spokesman Review newspaper, which is based in Spokane.
Oh, well, thank you so much for taking your time out to meet with us today. What the students have done is they've done some research on 4 statewide elected positions, so governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and the attorney general. Mm-hmm. And they have some questions about that.
Okay, that sounds good. We can go right to questions if you want. That would work fine.
Okay, that sounds great. We'll just have each student come up to this seat right here and we'll get started. All right, William.
Hi, my name is William. My question is about Bill Bryant, who's running for governor.
Okay.
So Bill Bryant spoke of rebuilding the state budget from zero. How does his proposed budget, if any, differ from the current Washington state budget?
Well, what he's talking about is something called zero-based budgeting. And this is kind of a technical term, which means you wipe out everything and then you start building all of the programs that the state has from scratch. So every program and every appropriation that the state makes has to be justified by each department that is in charge of that program. So it's a very complicated process. He doesn't, if you do this, you don't actually have a budget to compare with what's in there right now. The last time I talked to him, he admits that this is a long process. So I think on his website, he thinks it'll take, he says 3 to 4 years. Now he says it could take 4 to 7 years, which is a big difference because a governor has a term for 4 years. So if it takes 7 years, he's going to need 2 terms to get this done. But the idea that you would develop a program or a budget based on everything having to be justified right now is a popular concept with people who think we're spending too much money, but that the budget is so complicated that they can't come up with enough cuts to make their budgets work. What his biggest part of the budget that he has right now, not the zero-based budget, but a budget that he would have in his first term, talks about increasing the amount of money that the state spends on education. And he estimates that the state spends about 48% of its budget on K through 12 education and some preschool education. He would move that up to about 51%, which doesn't sound like much, but it would raise spending by about $1 billion. So that's his biggest change in budgets right now. But the zero-based budgeting is kind of a wonky way of looking at how we spend money.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
Hi, my name is Jacob, and I'm wondering, why do they keep the lieutenant governor and the governor separate, contrary to the federal government where the president and the vice president actually work together? Why did they choose to?
That's a good question, and it goes back to the way the state was put together in the late 1800s compared to the way people put together the U.S. Constitution in the late 1700s. By the late 1800s, there were a lot of people who looked at the way government and politics worked around the country, and they thought, we could do better. And if you study the history of the United States and the Constitution, you'd realize that initially we actually elected the president and the vice president separately. Back in those first elections, what happened was the president was the one who got the most electoral college votes, and the vice president was the one who got the second most electoral college votes. And the problem with that was that meant that the people who were running against each other for president wound up being president and vice president. So they changed that back in the early 1800s with an amendment to the Constitution. But the founding fathers of Washington State were what we call progressives and populists. And they wanted to improve on the system. And so they thought we should elect as many statewide officials as possible to give the people the most say in how their state government works. So they separated the president and the vice president, and that means that sometimes you could have the governor and the lieutenant governor. They separated the governor and lieutenant governor, and that means that sometimes you could have a governor who is a Democrat and a lieutenant governor who's a Republican, or vice versa. It hasn't happened a lot in the last 30 or 40 years because we haven't had a Republican governor since 1984, and all of the lieutenant governors since that time have also been Democrats, I think. So they're two separate offices. The lieutenant governor has responsibilities that include presiding over the state senate, and that's one of his main jobs. Now, you might say that the vice president of the United States has a similar responsibility under the Constitution, that the vice president presides over the U.S. Senate. But in reality, the vice president is rarely in the Senate chamber to preside over the U.S. Senate. The lieutenant governor is often in the state Senate chamber and basically calls balls and strikes for the Senate. He calls on people to speak. He also rules on whether or not an amendment is out of order, is not truly connected to the piece of legislation that's being debated. So he has a much more active role in the state Senate than the lieutenant governor has, practically speaking, in the U.S. Senate. He also has some other responsibilities sitting on various state boards and commissions, which the vice president doesn't have. It makes sense, I think, to have a president and vice president of the same party in relatively the same positions on major issues, because if the president were to die in office, the vice president would have to take over his responsibilities or her responsibilities. The lieutenant governor would do the same thing if the governor of Washington State were to die in office, but I don't think that the issues are quite as vital and difficult as the president faces. So I think it works to have them run separately. There are people who say that they should run together on the same ticket, and many states do it that way, but it would take an amendment to the state constitution to make that change.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name's Vivian, and my question is about Kim Wyman in Secretary of State position. So she says that she's all about increasing voter participation. It's one of her values, but voting participation has decreased 38% under her in office. So do you know why, and do you know if she has a plan to get it back up?
Well, voter participation is kind of it's a tough statistic to throw around. And I know that Secretary Wyman's opponent, Tina Podolsky, has been very critical of voter participation in the last 4 years. But some of the statistics that she cites are pretty hard to decipher. And let me explain this the best way I can. This year, 2016, a lot of people are going to register to vote, and most of them are going to actually cast a ballot because there's a big election on the ballot, and that's the presidential race. You have to go back to 2012 to have a similar situation. So if you compare 2012 to any of the years between then and now, the voter participation and the total number of people who are registered to vote are going to be less. That's just the way it always has been. People get excited about the presidential race, probably because it's everywhere. this year more than any other year that I can think of. The presidential candidates are on television all the time. They're in the newspapers all the time. You know, they're on Saturday Night Live every week. Not them personally, although Donald Trump was on Saturday Night Live last fall. So it gets people out to vote. Next year, there won't be anywhere near as much excitement. And a lot of people who registered to vote, just to vote in the presidential race this year, they're not gonna cast a ballot. And there's no way you can make them. You could possibly go to every house with a registered voter and put a gun to their head and make them fill out their ballot. But short of that, the turnout is going to be less next year. The year after that is a congressional election, and so the turnout for that will be better than in 2017, but it won't be what it is this year. So when you criticize people for voter turnout, what you want to look at is comparable years. And really, Kim Wyman doesn't have comparable years yet because she's only been in office for 3.5 years. So if voter participation is less this year than it is in 2012, that's a valid criticism. But right now, we have 4.2 million voters registered. And that's more than the state has ever had. We could have more, but it is extremely easy to register to vote in this state. So I don't know how much more we could push voter registration than we do right now. The real question is, will those people vote? Some of them who have signed up in the last 3 months, statistics show will vote because it's fresh in their minds. People who registered to vote earlier this year, maybe last year, they may not be as likely to vote statistically. And so what I think whoever becomes Secretary of State has to do is work on the off-year voter turnout and keep voter registration up, because if you don't vote for 4 years, you get bounced off the voter rolls in Washington State. So if you registered to vote in 2012 and you didn't vote then and you don't vote this year and haven't voted in between, you're gonna fall off the rolls. So I think it's important for state and county elections officials to do more than just register people to vote. It's important to get them out to vote, or you don't actually, in Washington State, you don't have to go anywhere. You get to mark your ballot at home. So, but to get them to cast their ballots. I have to apologize for using some old slang because I've been covering politics from going all the way back to the days when everybody went to their polling place on election day and punched a ballot for the candidates that they supported. We don't do that anymore, but we still kind of use the same language. But it is extremely easy to register to vote in Washington State, and it is extremely easy to vote, to cast your ballots. So I'm not sure what else either the Secretary of State or her opponent could do to make it better. There are things you could do to make it more secure, but I'm not sure what you could do to increase either registration or participation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Samantha, and my question is about Bob Ferguson.
Okay.
He mentioned one of his goals as running for Attorney General was to help prosecute environmental crimes. What sort of steps would need to be taken in order to effectively put this goal into play?
Well, we have a lot of laws in place that are designed to protect the environment. So I think the steps that need to be taken are more investigations. And this isn't just on the part of the Attorney General's office, but it would be on the part of Department of Ecology and the Department of Natural Resources, which manages most of the state lands. So I think that we would have to beef up inspections and the number of attorneys in the AG's office that look at these cases. These tend to be very complicated cases, and they rely a lot on scientific findings. They rely a lot on good inspections, good data. So that's not really solely in the purview of the Attorney General, because the people who pay for these inspections, these people who do the inspections and monitor the regulations, that's the legislature. They would have to spend more money on the Department of Ecology and on the Department of Natural Resources, and give Bob Ferguson more money for that part of his Attorney General's office for those kinds of prosecutors. Now, the Attorney General's office is essentially the biggest law firm in the state. It has thousands of attorneys and thousands more of paralegals and support staff. The legislature might be a little bit leery about giving the AG a blank check on these sorts of things. So what he's going to have to do is he's going to have to come to the legislature and make the case that things that are happening right now around the state are hurting the environment, and if we had more inspectors and more regulators and more attorneys, we could stop it. Because it's one thing to say, this is bad. It's another thing to say, this is how I'm going to fix it. And I think that Bob Ferguson has made environmental protection one of his main goals. I mean, he's very big on consumer protection, environmental protection, and he's done a pretty good job of trying to keep the federal government in line with some of the promises that they've made to keep Washington clean, or to clean up messes that the federal government has made in Washington state over the decades. So those are also very complicated cases, and they wind up in federal court, and they keep going around and around. So I think that all of these things have to be taken into account when you start thinking about how is an attorney general, whether it's Bob Ferguson or his opponent, how are they going to do things? It takes money, basically, to do something more than what we are doing right now. And the people who are elected to statewide office, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, there's 9 offices that are statewide elective, what we call executive offices. They get to spend the money, but they don't get to decide how much money they get to spend. That's the job of the legislature. And so you have to go to the legislature and make the case for more money. And Bob Ferguson's been pretty good at that, but he'd like to do more. Almost every statewide elected official would like to do more with the issues that he thinks are the most important. If he gets a second term, he'll have some experience. He'll have the 4 years that he spent in his first term going to the legislature. He may have learned a few things that worked better than other things. He may have learned a few things that didn't work very well, and he could kind of drop those. So I think that's what you would see if he gets reelected.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It looks like we have about 10 more minutes. Does that seem right on your end as well?
Yeah, that's what the little clock in the corner says.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. We'll go back to Governor now.
Okay.
Hi. Okay. I'm Nate, and I'm wondering about how the fact that the governor can appoint officials to commissions and such. How much power does that give the governor, and why is that power important? And can abuse of power happen with that?
Oh, multiple questions.
One big question.
The power is important, but it depends on which board or commission or committee you're talking about. There are hundreds of appointments that a governor makes on almost all aspect of state government. It might have something. There are boards on the environment. There are boards on racial committees for making sure minorities have proper voices. There are the community colleges and the state universities have boards of trustees or regents. All of these appointments fall to the governor, and he has a staff that checks out the history, the biographies, basically to determine whether or not those people would make good appointees. Now, some of these are political appointments. There are people who supported the governor when he ran for election. Some of them are people who are recommended by people he knows in the various fields. So it can be a very big obligation and responsibility to pick the right people for a special important committee. All governors make these appointments, and nobody bats 1,000 when it comes to picking good people. Sometimes the person that you think is going to do a great job for one reason or another doesn't work out. So I think it's a good system, but it's a flawed system because most of these appointments have to be approved by the state Senate. And any important position, and some not so important positions, they have to be approved by the state Senate in what is usually a fairly simple pro forma vote. But because there are hundreds and hundreds of these positions, the Senate tends to fall behind. And so a person could get appointed to a commission or a board or a committee, or as the head of a department. They could get appointed the first month that the governor takes office. And they may not come up for a year before the legislature has a chance to confirm them, because the committee that oversees that particular part of state government likes to hold a hearing and likes to bring these people in, talk to them, give them a chance to explain why they would make a good board member or commissioner for this particular issue. And then the full Senate has to vote on them. And occasionally the Senate just doesn't vote on them. They don't confirm them. That doesn't mean that they don't hold that position. It means that they could be removed at any time. And we saw this in the last legislative session, not with the board and commission, but with a department head, the head of the Department of Transportation, which is a very important job in Washington State. You know, if you drive anywhere on the interstate or the state highways or cross bridges or any of those things, the Department of Transportation kind of has your progress in its hands. The Senate decided it did not like the way some things were going with transportation, particularly the high occupancy vehicle toll lanes on 405, and so they held a vote on the head of the department that they decided to take that out on her, and they rejected her after she'd been serving in that position for probably a year and a half. And it came as a surprise because one afternoon we got word about lunchtime that they were going to vote on the director of transportation, and within a couple hours she was out, she was gone. So there is a check and balance here. The governor appoints, the Senate confirms, but the governor appoints so many people, and the Senate must confirm so many of these, hundreds of these positions, that sometimes we don't get good basic government as a result of the delay. But it's an interesting question, because I don't think anybody runs for governor thinking, oh, I get to appoint hundreds of people to hundreds of commission spots. But that becomes part of your responsibility to pick good people to help run the state, because the state's a very complicated operation. There are tens of thousands of state employees and hundreds of commissions that try to make sure that life works well in Washington, that it's safe, that the colleges are running properly, that zoning laws are upheld, and it's a very complicated system that I think we are operating out of, basically the 1890s, which is when the system was set up.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I think because we probably only have a couple minutes left, I was wondering if you had, one of the things that they're going to be doing is putting together their own voters pamphlet of the initiatives that we haven't looked at yet, but also statewide elected officials as well as their own legislative districts. Is there anything that you see kind of coming up that they should be paying close attention to in the next few weeks?
Well, there's a couple of debates left. There's one gubernatorial debate left and one U.S. Senate debate left. So you might want to watch those, and you can watch the previous ones on TVW because they are recorded. So I would look for I would watch the first ones and then see if anything changes for the second ones. For your individual legislative districts, there are probably debates that are sponsored by a local organization, maybe a Chamber of Commerce, the League of Women Voters. So you might want to check those out also. Read the candidate statements online, which the Secretary of State's office has every candidate running for office in Washington State this year, and all of the initiatives. They have statements from them. And for the initiatives, they have the pro and the con. Read those, but read them with a grain of salt, because nobody is ever as positive about their life and their ideas as a candidate who's trying to convince you to vote for him or her in the upcoming election. So if what the candidates are saying about themselves seem too good to be true, it probably is. But look in particular about the issues where the two candidates disagree on issues, and then do a little research online on those issues. Check it out. Check out your local newspapers, because most newspapers are like the Spokesman Review in that we track all of our electoral coverage, and so you might be able to go back into the newspaper's archives and see what's been written about these candidates or these issues just by a simple search. I know our search engine works pretty well that way. So read a lot. If you possibly can, attend a debate or a forum. If you can't, email a question about a particular issue that you're interested in to the two candidates. Most of them have a campaign staff that will respond. But there's nothing like catching a candidate live and getting a feel for him or her when you're trying to report on an individual race. So check out where they're going to be and go see them.
Great, thank you so much. There's a little echo there. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help them and answer their questions. So
yeah, well, I think it's important because you're the next generation of voters there. So you can't. It doesn't look like you're going to be able to vote this year, right? Nope. But
in 4 years.
In 4 years.
Some of us missed by like a month.
Yeah, some of them missed the next 4-year election by a month.
Oh, bummer. But it doesn't hurt to get a little practice in. Checking out candidates and what they say and how to kind of wade through all the mess out there, because that's what we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, we really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again later on this month.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.